The windows on East 35th Street always sweated in summer. Thick glass, fogged from the inside, streaked with dirt and the sticky breath of 100 restless nights. Arnold used to press his fingers against them when he was a boy, 5 of them in a row like a slow piano chord, and watch the world go by like it owed him something. He wasn't tall then. He wasn't feared or respected or whispered about in poker halls. He was just Arnie, the quiet kid with a collared shirt too big for his neck and shoes shined like his father's prayers. The kind of boy who didn't play stickball but knew who owed who 20 cents on the corner. His father, Abraham Rothstein, was a righteous man, a rabbi. Stern voice, heavy hands. He believed in order, discipline, God. Not in dice games, not in backroom cigar smoke, not in poker-faced boys who watched the world with their mouths shut and minds racing. But Arnold, he saw the cracks in holy walls. He saw how even the most devout men flinched when debt knocked twice. He saw that the Torah couldn't wipe away the stains on a gambler's soul, not when the stakes were too good to pass up. The city in the late 1800s was tired and wild, a creature made of horseshoes and whiskey breath. Everything moved slow but dangerous, like a dog with ribs showing and a reason to bite. Immigrants filled the tenements. Jewish boys like Arnold learned English fast, but numbers faster. Numbers didn't lie. Men did. His first lesson came from a candy store down on 2nd Avenue. The man behind the counter kept a chalkboard ledger under the counter. Arnold noticed it when the man reached for a licorice stick. He watched how Mr. Glickstein gave different prices to different boys. 3 cents here, 5 there. Free for some, paid double for others. Arnold said nothing, just watched. 2 weeks later, he had his own system. He was 8 years old. And already he could tell you which grocer was bleeding credit, which tailor gambled behind the synagogue, which kid was stealing from his own mother to bet on dice near the train tracks. He didn't speak much. That was the thing. Arnold listened. People always wanted to be heard, but they never listened to the silence after their own words. At night, he'd lie on a hard mattress beside the window and listen to his father's voice, reading Hebrew prayers in the next room. The cadence was always the same. Up, then down. Pause, repeat. It soothed most boys to sleep. Arnold didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and pictured cards. He imagined dice tumbling slow, like they had weight and purpose. He saw stacks of coins, folded bills, names written on paper, debts erased with one nod or one bullet. The future didn't come to him in dreams. It came in details. A man's limp, the rings on his fingers, a tie that cost too much for a clerk's salary. Rothstein paid attention when other boys blinked. By 13, he was borrowing cash from a man twice his age, not to eat, not to buy anything, but to loan it back out, with interest. It wasn't greed. Not then. It was about proof, that he could see the board 2 moves ahead, that he could make things happen just by understanding what others wanted most. He wasn't violent, never needed to be. When you know what makes a man sweat, you don't have to pull a knife. You just have to sit still long enough to let him feel it. And so began the quiet rise of Arnold Rothstein, not with a gun, not with a fist, but with stillness. In a city full of shouting mouths, he chose to listen. And from that silence, power began to take root. The Lower East Side had its own rhythm, like a crooked metronome ticking offbeat between horse hooves, butcher knives, and Yiddish curses shouted across fire escapes. Even in the early 1900s, the neighborhood didn't sleep so much as simmer. Everything stank of sweat, ambition, and bread gone slightly stale. The gutters whispered secrets, and every stoop had a story half told. Arnold was 15 when he started showing up at Sammy Danziger's pool hall, a little dive tucked behind Katz's Deli. The air inside was thick with chalk dust and cigar smoke. The men talked loud, laughed louder, and bet like they were dying tomorrow. And maybe some of them were. These weren't bankers or rabbis. They were grinders, street men, hustlers in cheap hats and cheaper suits. Arnold didn't belong there. Not yet. He was too clean, too quiet. But he didn't flinch when they cursed or spat or slammed sticks on green felt. He stood near the back, hands in pockets, eyes sharp, and just watched. Sammy liked him, or rather, Sammy respected him, which was more important. "Kid watches like he's taking notes in his damn head," Sammy muttered once, shaking ash off his cigar. "Doesn't blink, like a damn owl." Arnold only smiled at that. Owls didn't blink because they didn't miss, and Rothstein didn't plan on missing anything. The first time someone let him into a card game, it wasn't out of charity. It was out of need. They were one hand short, and nobody wanted to wait. "You any good, kid?" "I'm quiet," Arnold said. "That's usually enough." He lost the first two hands, deliberately, small, just enough to earn shrugs and soft insults. One of the older men called him milk face. Another said he had prayer boy hands. Arnold smiled, watched, learned. By the sixth hand, he had the read on every man at the table. One tapped his finger when bluffing. Another squinted when holding. One kept licking his lips every time he was chasing a straight. It was like watching tells in bold letters. Nobody was hiding anything, not really. Arnold won the seventh hand, then the eighth, then folded the ninth, even though he had the high pair. "You had me," the man across from him said, grinning. "Why fold?" Arnold just tilted his head. "Because I don't want to win fast. That's how you get watched." There was a pause, a moment of respect, not loud, not showy, just a shared understanding that this boy wasn't playing for pennies. He was learning how the room worked. By 16, he wasn't borrowing money anymore. He had a bankroll, small but real, and he was lending, mostly to other kids. $5 here, 10 there, with interest, always with interest. It wasn't about greed. It was about principle. Money had to move, money had to teach. He'd walk the streets in pressed slacks and a tucked-in shirt, clean shoes, hat straight, always watching, always 3 thoughts deep in someone else's business. He knew which boys were sneaking out to gamble at night. He knew which ones were cutting corners at the docks, lifting crates and slipping jewelry into their pockets. He never threatened them. He offered protection, discretion, loans to fix what needed fixing. He didn't say much, but the words he did say stuck like glue. There was a boy named Meyer who came to Arnold with a busted nose and fear in his eyes. "They're going to break my legs," he said, nearly whispering. "For what?" "Poker. I owe them $70. They said they'll throw me off the bridge if I don't pay." Arnold didn't blink. "How'd you play that bad?" "I didn't. I had him. Then the river." Arnold held up a hand. "Doesn't matter, you're breathing. That's the part we focus on." He lent Meyer the money. No questions, no lecture, just a soft warning. Don't be stupid twice. A week later, Meyer paid him back, in full, and said something Arnold wouldn't forget. "You're not like the other guys. You don't shout. You don't wave a gun. But somehow you feel scarier." Arnold didn't laugh, didn't even smile. "That's because I don't make threats," he said. "I make predictions." The first time he got truly tested, it wasn't in a game or a back room. It was in the street, outside the pool hall. 2 guys, older, thicker, meaner, cornered him. They'd seen him collecting envelopes, thought he was soft, easy pickings. "You think wearing nice shoes makes you someone?" one of them asked, smirking. Arnold looked at the man's knuckles, scarred, cracked. This guy had punched more than he'd hugged. The other one had a lazy eye and bad breath, real street trash, the kind that didn't care about words. "I don't want trouble," Arnold said simply. Wrong move. The first punch caught him in the gut, knocked the wind out of him. The second hit the side of his face, sent stars dancing behind his eyes. He hit the ground hard, dirt in his mouth, elbows scraped. They took his envelope, walked off laughing. Arnold didn't chase, he didn't cry, he went home, cleaned the blood off his chin, sat in silence. Then, the next morning, he went to Sammy, told him the names, just the names. Sammy nodded, nothing more. 2 days later, one of those men was found face down in an alley, teeth scattered like dice. The other left town. No goodbye. Nobody ever touched Arnold again. Not because he was tough, because he didn't need to be. 17. That's when the real money started showing up. Arnold began organizing his own games. Poker, dice, even bookmaking for local horse races. Word spread fast. His games were clean. No cheating, no setups, just stakes. If you won, you walked. If you lost, you paid. Or you never played again. And when someone couldn't pay, Arnold didn't send thugs. He sent reminders, quiet ones, a letter, a phone call, a man standing outside your mother's house for 10 minutes too long. The point wasn't fear, it was control. Control mattered more than violence. Control lasted. He started buying suits that actually fit, caught the eye of men twice his age. One of them, an old gambler named Frankie Crimmins, watched Arnold win 3 hands in a row without blinking. "You got ice in your veins," Frankie muttered. "No," Arnold replied. "I just learned not to flinch before the card turns." It wasn't all clean. Never was. There were nights where things went sideways. A drunk man threw a bottle once, called Arnold a cheat, accused him in front of a full room. Arnold didn't even stand up, and he just said, "If I cheated, you wouldn't be talking." The man laughed like it was a joke. That night, the man got jumped outside the bar. Not by Arnold, but by 2 other players who'd lost money and didn't like having their game called fake. Arnold didn't order it. He didn't need to. When people trust your name, they protect it for you. By 18, Arnold had a following. Not a gang, not exactly friends, but a loose web of people who owed him favors, feared him, or wanted to be close to whatever luck followed him. And through it all, he stayed calm. Quiet. He didn't drink, didn't chase skirts, didn't gamble recklessly. He showed up. He watched. He made his moves like a chess player with infinite patience. His mother once asked him, "What do you plan to do with your life, Arnie?" He kissed her hand and said softly, "Whatever I want." And still, he couldn't sleep. Not like other boys. Even when his bed was soft and his pockets full, Arnold lay awake, eyes open, mind running. Because peace, he learned, was a lie. You could buy silence, but not rest. And somewhere out there, in another room, in another game, someone else was watching the way he used to. A boy with prayer boy hands and wolf's eyes, waiting. By the time Arnold Rothstein turned 19, the street corners weren't enough. He had already outgrown the Lower East Side in spirit. The kids who once feared or admired him had either vanished into factories or vanished into jail cells. The rest floated in limbo, still tossing dice in basements or running bets for men who didn't tip. But Arnold, he had begun looking uptown. Manhattan was changing, like a beast shedding its skin. Broadway lit up at night now, glowing like sin in a tuxedo. The rich had begun building temples of stone and marble. Music leaked out of cabaret doors. Horses gave way to automobiles. But underneath it all, behind the silk curtains and gold trim, the same game was being played. Same greed, same fear, same debts. Only now, the players wore perfume and paid men to do their dirty work. Arnold understood something most men missed. The rich weren't cleaner, just quieter. And where there's silence, there's opportunity. He started dressing sharper. Not flashy, just deliberate. Gray 3-piece suits with thin lapels, shirts always pressed, shoes that clicked soft on marble floors. No jewelry except a simple gold tie pin. He carried himself like a man who belonged, not like he was trying to prove it. And that was the key. He didn't force his way into the upper rooms. He just appeared, like he had always been there. At first, it was the back booths of fine restaurants, small dinners, cigars passed in crystal trays, talk of racing, politics, the market. Men in tailored coats spoke with heavy jaws and careful words. They laughed in low tones and studied each other between sips of bourbon. Arnold sat, mostly listening. A young man with 2 old eyes and a voice like steady rain. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue. But when he spoke, the whole room leaned slightly closer, not out of fear, but curiosity. He knew horses, he knew numbers, but more than anything, he knew men, their flaws, their fears, their tells. And in rooms full of powerful people, knowing who was pretending was worth more than gold. There was a man named Philip Greer, a Wall Street broker with cufflinks worth more than Arnold's apartment. Greer was loud, arrogant, and drunk on his own fortune. But he had a problem. Gambling. The kind that doesn't go away after a bad month. The kind that becomes a whisper in your blood. He lost 20 grand one night betting on a racehorse that threw its leg halfway through the second turn. A clean break, instant loss. Greer laughed it off at the table, but everyone saw the sweat. Arnold, especially. After dinner, while the others smoked out front, Rothstein approached. "You like that horse too much?" Arnold said softly. Greer squinted at him. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who understands why you bet that much." "Oh?" "Enlighten me." Arnold stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You weren't betting on the horse. You were betting you could impress the other men at the table. Problem is, you didn't realize they were letting you." Greer's face changed, barely, but Arnold caught it. "Now," Rothstein continued, "if you want to bet on something worth the risk, I suggest poker." "And what makes you think you can play at my table?" "I don't want to play at your table," Rothstein said. "I want to own the table you're playing on." That conversation led to Arnold's first real entry into the uptown gambling scene. The high-stakes, backroom games hosted in private clubs where the rules were made by the host, and the police didn't knock unless they were on the payroll. These weren't street games. These were orchestrated social events. Whiskey flowing, women laughing softly in the corners, jazz bleeding from phonographs, and fortunes exchanging hands across velvet tables. Arnold didn't chase action. He watched, studied, built profiles in his mind. One man drank too much and bragged about deals that weren't public yet. Another had a twitch in his eye every time he bluffed. One always looked down at his chips like they could answer prayers. Arnold never judged. He just noted. And then he made them pay for being predictable. Within 6 months, Rothstein wasn't just playing. He was running games, quietly. He used cutouts, frontmen who handled the setup, the rent, the logistics. But everyone who mattered knew whose game it really was, and they came. Because Arnold's tables had rules, clean decks, no cheating, no setups. And if someone got out of line, they were removed, politely but permanently. He gained a reputation, not as a gangster, not as a thug, but as a gentleman of order. A man you could trust with your money, even if you couldn't trust yourself. His clubs were candlelit cathedrals to control. He served expensive whiskey. He paid for silence, and he always made sure the right people left with a little more than they came in with. Because loyalty wasn't bought once, it was bought over and over again. But with every rise, there's a challenge. And to Arnold's came in the form of a man named Luca Vanetti. Vanetti was old school, Italian blood, ran gambling halls down by the docks, loud, violent, vulgar. He believed fear was enough. That blood bought silence. Arnold's operation had started eating into Vanetti's territory, not with fists, but with class. His players were defecting. Why gamble in sweat-soaked rooms with crooked dealers when Rothstein's tables offered silk chairs and ice-cold bourbon? One night, a man in a brown overcoat stepped into Arnold's club and sat without playing. He didn't drink, didn't smile. When the tables closed, he stood near the exit. "You're making noise in places that used to be quiet," he said to Rothstein. Arnold looked at the man, then at the empty room. "It's not noise," he replied. "It's refinement." The man smirked. "Vanetti doesn't like refined. He likes respect." Arnold straightened his tie. Then he should earn it. 2 nights later, one of Arnold's dealers got jumped outside his apartment. Broken wrist, missing teeth. Arnold didn't retaliate. He adjusted. He hired 2 quiet ex-boxers as doormen. He paid off 3 more cops. And then he invited Vanetti to dinner. Yes, invited him. No threats, no grandstanding, just an invitation to a steakhouse uptown. Vanetti showed up in a wrinkled suit and bad attitude. Arnold wore gray, pressed, calm. They talked, ate, didn't smile. Rothstein laid it out slow. "You can run your games your way," he said. "I'll run mine. But if your men touch mine again, I'll buy every building you operate in, and I'll run bingo out of them just to humiliate you." Vanetti chuckled like it was a joke. It wasn't. A month later, Rothstein did buy one of his halls, through a lawyer, through a shell name, and turned it into a private bridge club. Vanetti backed off. The war ended before it began. Because Arnold didn't fight with fists. He fought with dignity and money. By 21, his empire was forming. He had clubs, connections, a small network of fixers, muscle, and lawyers. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. Just a quiet hum beneath the streets of Manhattan. He had his own office, Small, tastefully decorated, wood panels, a desk with no clutter, a safe behind a wall, always locked. People came and went, always alone, never groups. He scheduled every meeting himself. If someone was late, they didn't get rescheduled. Respect wasn't demanded, it was expected. He took calls from Tammany Hall, had lunch with judges, once had a drink with a priest who confessed his sins. Arnold listened, smiled politely, and remembered everything, because every favor stored was just another step in the plan. He wasn't thinking about money anymore. He was thinking about legacy. But still, he couldn't sleep, not like others. He'd lie in bed in a room too quiet, listening to the soft click of the radiator. He didn't hear trains anymore, or dogs barking. The street noise had been replaced with silence. But silence didn't mean peace, because when you know what men are capable of, it becomes hard to forget what they hide. Every deal, every name, every small betrayal that passed across his desk. They lived in his mind like cards mid-deal, waiting to be turned. There are moments in a man's life when he crosses a line he never comes back from. It doesn't happen with fanfare. There's no thunder, no roaring applause. Often, it's a quiet decision, made in the span of a breath, a pause before a name is written, a word is said, a hand is shaken. For Arnold Rothstein, that moment came on a warm June afternoon, beneath the sun-baked grandstands of Belmont Park. The air smelled of cigars, horse sweat, and something heavier, hope. Thousands of men clutching betting slips, eyes flicking toward the track like they could will a win into existence. They dressed in pressed linen and desperation, and they moved with the jerky rhythm of gamblers on the edge. Arnold stood beneath the awning, glancing down the program with one hand in his pocket. His suit was light gray, hat tilted just enough to block the sun. A golden tie pin gleamed against his shirt, subtle but noticeable. That was the thing about him. He wasn't showy, but he was seen. He wasn't there to bet. He was there to learn. Horse racing in New York wasn't just a sport. It was a religion, one built on speed, luck, and inside knowledge. And behind every horse was a web of whispers. Trainers, jockeys, owners, and bookies, all dancing to a tune played in back rooms and whispered phone calls. Arnold had watched the game for a year, not the races, but the people. The way odds shifted for no clear reason, the way a sure thing suddenly stumbled, the way a horse with no pedigree flew down the track like it had the devil under its tail. He saw patterns others didn't, and more importantly, he saw opportunities. That afternoon at Belmont, he wasn't looking for a winner. He was looking for a weak link. He found it in the form of a skinny jockey named Eddie Kearns. Eddie had the posture of a man who'd been kicked too many times in life. Small, wired, anxious. The kind of guy who smiled too fast and looked over his shoulder even faster. Rothstein had heard his name floating around the stables. Rumors of bad debts, late-night poker games, IOUs scrawled on napkins and tucked under whiskey glasses. Rothstein approached him after the fourth race, casually, like two men meeting by accident near the paddocks. "You ride like you're chasing ghosts," Arnold said quietly. Eddie blinked. "Do I know you?" "Number. But you know the people who know me." Eddie swallowed. Arnold nodded toward the stables. "Walk with me." They didn't talk at first, just strolled past the hay bales, the flies, the low murmurs of stable hands brushing down the day's losers. Then Rothstein spoke again, soft and measured. "You owe money." Eddie's jaw tensed. "Not a lot," Rothstein continued. "Not yet. But you're chasing it, making bets to cover debts, riding scared. I ride clean." "I didn't say you didn't." Pause. They reached a corner, a shade of privacy. "But one day soon," Arnold said, "you're going to get an offer, maybe not from me, maybe from someone else, and you'll take it. Not because you're crooked, but because you're drowning. And when a man's drowning, even dirty water looks like salvation." Eddie's hands twitched. Arnold handed him a small envelope. "Inside is enough to clear what you owe. Not a gift, a future investment." Eddie hesitated. "What do you want?" "When the time comes, you'll ride like I say, that's all." Eddie looked around, like someone might be watching. "They'll kill me if they find out." Arnold smiled faintly. Only if you lose on the wrong day. I don't plan on letting that happen. It didn't happen that week, or the next. Rothstein waited. He watched Eddie race 3 more times, never placed higher than 3rd. He rode like a man afraid of both winning and losing, the kind of man who knew eyes were on him. Perfect. Then came the Belmont Cup, a showcase race, big money, big names, and just enough chaos to slip a fix through the cracks. Arnold made the call 2 days before. "This race," he told Eddie, "you ride slow. Don't fall, don't get thrown, just don't place. But I've got the second favored mount." "I know. You want him to lose?" "I want the 4th favored to win." Eddie was silent for a moment. "That's a hell of a payout." "Exactly. People are going to notice," Arnold nodded. "That's why it has to be you." The day of the race, the crowd was electric. The stands buzzed. Betting slips changed hands faster than poker chips. The odds shifted subtly just hours before the start. Nothing outrageous, but enough to draw whispers. Rothstein's money had already moved, split between proxies and out-of-town bookmakers. His pick, the 4th favored horse, Midnight Ledger, stood tall in the paddock, its nostrils flaring like it knew something was different. Arnold watched from the box seats, not with excitement, but precision. Every blink, every motion. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. The gates opened, the horses burst forward, and Eddie Kearns, reliable, nervous Eddie, held back just enough, not suspiciously, not obviously, but enough. And Midnight Ledger ran like a ghost, silent, swift, gone. He crossed the finish line 3 lengths ahead. The crowd screamed. Rothstein didn't move. By the end of the day, Arnold had cleared over $300,000 in quiet payouts, more than most men would see in 5 lifetimes. No violence, no screaming, just a whisper and a win. That night, he met Eddie in a hotel room 2 boroughs away. "You did good," Arnold said. Eddie's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "People are asking questions. Let them. They'll think I took money." "You did take money." Eddie exhaled. "What now?" "Now," Arnold said, "we wait. You win the next 3 races. Clean. Let the heat die. And then," Arnold picked up his glass, swirled the bourbon, "then we do it again." That race marked a turning point, not because of the money, but because it proved something to Rothstein, that the system wasn't just broken, it was open, willing, aching for control. All it took was the right pressure in the right place. And the people at the top? They didn't care. They didn't want purity. They wanted predictability. As long as the game looked clean, they didn't ask what was happening underneath. He started expanding after that. More racetracks, more jockeys, more fixes, never too obvious, never too greedy. Just enough to bend outcomes, just enough to stay ahead. And each time, he made sure the winners weren't the ones people expected. That way, the suspicion stayed scattered, unfocused. Meanwhile, Rothstein's influence spread like smoke under a door. He wasn't just fixing races, he was building a blueprint, a formula, and more importantly, he was building a network, not of criminals, but of useful men, trainers who owed him favors, bookies who trusted his picks, cops who didn't see what they weren't paid to see, owners who asked questions, but only after they were paid not to ask again. He didn't threaten them. He didn't need to. He gave them results. That was enough. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Not accusations, not yet. Just rumors. Someone's rigging the books. Too many long shots hitting. The odds don't make sense anymore. Arnold heard them all. He smiled. Because when people start looking everywhere for a ghost, they miss the man standing right in front of them. Late one night, after another quiet fix at Saratoga, Arnold stood alone on a balcony, cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The city below blinked with lights and lies. A friend, one of the few he trusted, stepped out beside him. "You ever worry?" the friend asked. "About all this?" Arnold looked at the stars. "No," he said. "Why not?" He turned, slow and sure. "Because I never play unless I know the ending." Autumn in 1919 crept in like an old man with secrets, slow, brittle, and cold at the edges. New York had started to shift. not just in temperature, but in mood. The war had ended the year before, but the country still twitched like it hadn't quite caught its breath. Men were coming home, but not all of them came back whole. Factories hummed, speakeasies whispered, and above all else, baseball marched on, pretending nothing had changed. Arnold Rothstein wasn't much of a fan. He didn't care for uniforms or chants, and the noise of the crowd bored him. To him, it looked like boys hitting a ball and pretending it meant something. But what did catch his eye, and what kept him watching, was how many people believed it did. That was the power, not the game itself, but the faith in the game, the illusion, the purity, the trust. And trust, Rothstein knew, was the most expensive lie in the world. He began paying attention to more than just the box scores. He paid attention to rumors. Men were saying strange things about the Chicago White Sox. Too much talk. Too many stumbles that didn't look like accidents. There was a hesitation in how some of them swung the bat, how they ran the bases. Not obvious, not like a thrown racehorse limping out the gate, but subtle, controlled, manipulated. Rothstein knew that smell, knew it better than most. It was the smell of a fix. He didn't invent the idea. The whispers were already in the air. But Rothstein was the only one bold, or cold, enough to step into the fog and make it real. He never said it outright, never wrote a word, never signed anything. That was his genius. His fingerprints were never on the knife, only the shadow behind it. It began with a man named Sleepy Bill Burns, a washed-up pitcher with a gambler's debt and a dreamer's ego. Burns knew some of the Sox players, men with just enough talent to matter and just enough greed to sell it. Burns needed money to float the scheme. Arnold had money. More importantly, he had discipline. The meetings were quiet, spread out in hotel rooms and private apartments, never the same location twice. The players didn't come all at once. They trickled in one by one like ashamed sinners. Chick Gandil, strong, grim, with hands that could choke a fastball, and a man with equal ease. He was the ringleader, the one who needed convincing the least. Others followed. Swede Risberg, Lefty Williams, Eddie Cicotte. Some were eager, some were scared. Most just wanted out of their contracts. Major League Baseball was rich, but its players weren't. The owners lived in mansions. The players rode coach and prayed their arm didn't give out before 30. Rothstein didn't deal with them directly. That wasn't his way. He used middlemen, men like Burns and Abe Attell, a former featherweight boxing champion with a big mouth and little sense. Arnold knew Abe was a risk, but sometimes you needed fire to spread smoke. The plan was simple. Throw the World Series, 8 games, 100 moments where hesitation could look like accident, a pitcher who walks too many, a batter who swings late, an error that lets a man steal second. Nothing obvious, nothing loud, just wrong enough. Rothstein's role wasn't to orchestrate every move. He wasn't a coach. He didn't need to be. He was the bank. He backed the entire fix with $100,000. Not all at once, but enough to control the rhythm. Enough to make men forget their loyalty to the game. And in return, he placed bets. Not through one bookie, not even 10. He scattered his wagers across dozens of cities, using fake names, cutouts, and backroom proxies. He bet against the White Sox, hard. The first game was in Cincinnati, October 1st, 1919. It rained that morning, soft and cold. Arnold sat in his suite in New York, drink untouched, eyes flicking over the lines in the paper. He already knew what would happen, and it did. Eddie Cicotte, the Sox's ace, hit a batter in the first inning, a signal. Then he pitched like a man who'd lost his soul. Walks. Meatballs over the plate, errors that made no sense. They lost 9-1. And that, as they say, was that. The fix was in. Over the next week, the series spiraled. The White Sox lost Game 2. Then, strangely, they won Game 3. Arnold's phone rang within the hour. It was Abe. "They're getting cold feet," Abe said. "Why?" "Cicotte says he's worried about jail. Chick says the money's late. They think you're backing out." Arnold took a slow breath. "Tell them the money's coming." "It ain't, though." "No," Rothstein said. "But they don't need to know that." "Then what do we do?" "Sit still. The series isn't over. Abe laughed nervously. You're not worried? I don't place bets I can't rig. The Sox lost again. Then won. Then lost again. It was messy, unpredictable. The fix wobbled on bad communication and nerves. But in the end, the Sox lost the series. And Arnold won big. Some say he made over $350,000. Others say $500,000, maybe more. But money wasn't the point. The point was power. He had rigged the most sacred game in America and walked away untouched. No blood, no gunfire, no trace, just the soft sound of folding bills. But rumors followed. Whispers grew louder. The press caught wind of something rotten. Players talked. The fix unraveled, slow but steady. By 1920, a grand jury was convened. 8 players were indicted. The country was shocked. People wanted names. One name kept coming up, whispered in hallways, muttered in newspapers, speculated by columnists. Arnold Rothstein. But the law never touched him. He was called before the grand jury, eventually. He showed up in a silk suit, hat in hand, face calm. He sat. He spoke softly. He said he'd heard rumors like everyone else, but he had no involvement, no connection, no knowledge of any fix. He walked out an hour later, free, clean, untouchable. Privately, someone once asked him, "Did you fix the series?" Arnold didn't blink. "I've read that I did," he said, "but no one's ever proven it." "Is it true?" He smiled faintly. "The real crime," he said, "is betting on a game you don't control." The Black Sox scandal changed baseball forever. Players were banned. A commissioner was appointed. The sport rebuilt itself with new rules, new image, and new fears. But Arnold, he went on with his life, unbothered, richer, more respected, and far more feared. Because if he could rig baseball, what couldn't he touch? In back rooms, men began to say things with new tone. "Watch your bets. Rothstein might be behind it. Don't trust the odds, not if Arnold's playing. Hell, he could fix the sunrise if he wanted to." He had become more than a gambler. He was a myth. A gentleman ghost who sat behind every deal, every game, every win too clean to be real. And he liked it that way. Because when they talk about you in whispers, you're already 10 steps ahead. By 1920, the country had gone dry, or at least it liked to pretend it had. With the stroke of a pen and the hard slap of the Volstead Act, Prohibition became law. Liquor was outlawed, bars shuttered overnight, whiskey bottles were smashed in the streets while politicians gave speeches about morality and the soul of the nation. But in the alleys behind every closed bar, in every jazz joint with drawn curtains and a doorman who didn't ask names, the liquor still flowed. In fact, it poured heavier than before. America was dry on paper, but soaked in reality. And at the center of that thirsty, chaotic underworld stood a man in a pressed gray suit and polished shoes, who didn't drink, didn't dance, and didn't get his hands dirty. Arnold Rothstein. He didn't rush into the liquor trade like the others. While young men scrambled to get in first, bootlegging from Canada, hijacking trucks, bribing their way onto rum-running crews, Arnold waited, sat back, watched, let the chaos unfold, because chaos is always loud at first, and loud gets sloppy. He saw them all. The street thugs turned liquor peddlers, the old gangsters trying to claim new turf, the politicians taking cash with one hand and signing arrest warrants with the other. It was a mess, a noisy, dangerous, bloody mess. But behind every shipment, behind every crooked warehouse deal and broken bottle, Rothstein saw a structure waiting to happen. He didn't want a piece of the liquor trade. He wanted to own the system behind it. It began with importation, Canadian whiskey, good stuff, clean, aged, desired by every upper-crust drinker in New York. Most bootleggers smuggled it over the border like fools, hidden under hay, tucked into train shipments, ferried across icy lakes in wooden boats barely held together with nails and guts. Not Rothstein. He bought customs officials, not one, not two, a string of them, from Buffalo to Detroit to Vermont. Men with families, men who wanted to stay out of the news, and through them the liquor flowed like water through a garden hose. Steady, quiet, reliable. He never touched a bottle, but every bottle owed him a tax. Then came the distribution. Rothstein didn't deal with street dealers or thugs who waved guns for fun. He created a network, a business, not a gang. Men in suits, clean cars, quiet mouths. He took clubs, restaurants, theaters, and brothels and made them into outlets. Places where the rich could drink without fear, where the working man could drown the weak without catching a bullet to the back. He gave them two things: consistency and safety. And in return, they gave him everything. Arnold knew the streets, but he didn't live on them. He understood gangsters, their pride, their tempers, their hunger, and he knew that ego was the enemy of profit. So when men like Dutch Schultz or Oni Madden came stomping around, swinging fists and laying claim to corners, Rothstein did something they never expected. He paid them, up front, generous cuts, no haggling, not out of weakness, but out of design. "Let them fight," he once told a young associate. "While they bleed over territory, I'll own the trucks that bring them their booze." He had judges, police captains, ward bosses from Tammany Hall who drank at his private card games and owed him more than favors. He once paid off a citywide liquor task force before it was even formed, slipping envelopes to men whose names weren't yet in the papers. "How did you know they'd be on the task force?" someone asked. "I didn't," Rothstein replied, "so I paid all of them." He didn't build an empire with guns. He built it with ledgers and favors. He kept records of every deal, every shipment, every bribe, all written in a private code, known only to him and one man who could barely read and knew better than to try. He stored the notebooks in a hidden safe, behind a painting of a horse he didn't particularly like. "They say you're too careful," a rival once told him. Arnold smiled. "They're wrong," he said. "I'm not careful. I'm patient." He bought warehouses in Brooklyn, loading docks near Hell's Kitchen. He even leased a bottling plant in Jersey and disguised it as a factory that made cleaning supplies. They'd bottle the whiskey, slap fake government stamps on it, and ship it out in boxes marked turpentine or floor wax. Customs waved them through. Police looked the other way. Everyone ate. And Arnold? He watched the numbers grow. There was a man named Leo Rothman, a loudmouth upstart from the Bronx who tried to undercut Rothstein's prices by watering down Canadian whiskey and selling it to cheap speakeasies. The first week, Leo made a killing. The second week, 3 people died from bad liquor. The third week, one of Rothstein's delivery men was shot outside a jazz club owned by Leo's cousin. Arnold didn't shout, didn't threaten. He invited Leo to dinner, a private room, expensive wine neither of them drank. Arnold asked him one question. "Do you like making money?" Leo said yes. Arnold nodded. "Then stop being stupid." Leo didn't take the deal. 3 days later, Leo's warehouse burned to the ground. He took the deal after that. Rothstein didn't need to make threats. He let the world make them for him. If a man stole from him, the man disappeared. But not always in violence. Sometimes he just vanished from business. No more deals, no more access, no more credit. In Rothstein's world, being cut off was worse than being cut open. Because without access to his liquor, his people, his protection, a man became prey. And everyone in New York knew it. By 1922, Arnold Rothstein was pulling in more money weekly than most banks earned monthly. Not just from booze, from cards, from dice, from horses, from real estate, from silence. He owned rooms, not buildings, people, not companies. The mayor's driver once owed him $1,200 from poker. He never paid it. But every week, the mayor's schedule arrived on Arnold's desk like clockwork. No threats, no reminders, just influence. And yet, for all the power, all the money, Rothstein still lived like a man untouched. He didn't carry a gun, didn't travel with bodyguards. He walked into rooms like he already owned the building, because most times he did. He kept his meals simple, his circle small. He didn't laugh much, didn't trust easily. He once said, "Men talk too much when they're winning. That's when you kill them, with silence." The press called him the Brain. Not a gangster, not a kingpin, but something different, smarter, more dangerous, because he didn't fit the mold. He didn't get his hands dirty. He didn't bleed in alleys or shout in bars. He calculated, always 10 steps ahead, always watching, always waiting. There was a young thug, name unimportant, who once tried to shake down one of Rothstein's clubs for protection. Arnold invited him in, gave him a drink, told him a story about a dog who barked too loud and got eaten by silence. The kid laughed. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Arnold poured another drink, then simply said, "You won't live long enough to get scared." The kid disappeared within the week. Rothstein's empire was different from others because it didn't look like an empire. There were no flags, no banners, no brass knuckles, just 1,000 hands, each one holding a thread, and at the center, a man with a quiet voice and cold eyes pulling all of them. Prohibition was supposed to make America pure. Instead, it made Arnold Rothstein rich beyond imagination. But he didn't smile about it, didn't boast. He only once let it slip how he really felt. He was sitting alone at a poker table after hours. An associate asked him, "Do you ever feel guilty?" "About what?" "All this. The booze, the fixes, the way you run things." Arnold looked at the cards in his hand, unplayed. "Guilt is for men who lose," he said. Then he folded anyway. Because in his world, knowing when not to play was worth more than any win. Politics in New York was always a muddy thing. It didn't walk on clean shoes, and it never looked you straight in the eye. The votes might have been tallied by machines, but the power, that lived in handshakes behind closed doors and whispers in alleyways. Rothstein never ran for office. He didn't need to. He learned early that the man with the microphone wasn't the man with the power. The one who talked in public was just the face. The real power sat in the back of the room, watching everyone else sweat. And by 1923, Arnold Rothstein had taken his seat at that back table. He didn't just want to make money anymore. He wanted influence. Not because he wanted his name in lights, he hated lights, but because influence gave you something money couldn't: safety. And nothing was safer than having the law shake your hand while you emptied its pockets. It started small. A state assemblyman from Brooklyn owed Rothstein 10 grand in gambling debts. Stupid bets on college football games he didn't understand. Horses he couldn't pronounce. The man begged, pleaded, offered a painting, a watch, a second mortgage. Arnold said no. He offered him a deal instead. "There's a judge up in Harlem who's been cracking down on my boys," Rothstein said. So I want him reassigned." The politician laughed nervously. "You think I can move a judge?" "No," Rothstein said, "but I think you know someone who can." The man swallowed, thought, then nodded. A month later, the judge was transferred, and Rothstein had his first piece on the political chessboard. The second piece came during the 1923 New York mayoral election. Tammany Hall was losing its grip, slowly, like a drunk losing balance, and everyone knew the next mayor would either save them or bury them. Two frontrunners. One, a reformer, loud about cleaning up the city. The other, a Tammany-backed man with a bad haircut and worse morals. Rothstein didn't care who won. He cared who owed him. So he backed the Tammany man, quietly. He didn't donate publicly, he didn't hold rallies, he bought printing presses instead, paid for flyers, pamphlets, dirty rumors whispered through tenement hallways and slipped into church pews. He had bartenders talk up the Tammany man to customers, had taxi drivers hand out sample ballots that were just thinly veiled campaign ads. He paid women to stand in bread lines and talk about how the other guy hated the poor. He didn't just change minds, he steered the wind. And when election day came, he fixed that too, not by stuffing ballots himself, but by paying men who paid other men, who paid precinct captains, who paid watchmen. Votes got lost, names got added. Some neighborhoods reported 110% voter turnout. Rothstein didn't need them to win every borough. He just needed them to win enough. The Tammany man won by a margin so thin it looked accidental. But nothing about Rothstein's life was accidental. The new mayor was no genius. He didn't pretend to be. But the first week in office, he called Rothstein, not to thank him, not directly, just to invite him to dinner. Arnold didn't go. He sent a bottle of bourbon instead. Canadian, clean. The kind only men in certain rooms could get. With it, a note. No need for thanks. Just remember who kept the lights on. From there, The city bent quietly. Liquor shipments got through easier. Judges stopped asking hard questions. Police raids slowed. Licensing boards forgot to show up. Zoning laws got fuzzy. And Rothstein? He just sat back and watched. Because that's the thing about politics. Once it owes you, it keeps owing you. There's always a favor to be called. Always a vote that can be steered. Always a man who's more afraid of losing your protection than of being caught without it. He never blackmailed anyone. He never had to. He let them blackmail themselves. He'd invite a senator to a private card game, let him lose a few thousand, then lend him the money back with no interest. The senator would thank him, shake his hand, call him a gentleman. And a month later, Arnold would casually ask for a zoning variance in the Bronx. Nothing illegal, just a favor. And favors? They were like blood contracts in his world, unspoken, binding, and impossible to escape. There was a man, Patrick Quinn, deputy commissioner of something or other, who tried to cut Rothstein out of a police union deal, said he didn't want to be indebted to a gambler. Arnold nodded, said nothing. 3 weeks later, a story hit the papers. Quinn's nephew had been caught in a brothel raid. The details were graphic, embarrassing. The story just happened to leak from a journalist who owed Rothstein money. Quinn resigned quietly. No confrontation, no threats, just ruin delivered like mail. Rothstein never gloated, never smiled when men fell. But he remembered every time they doubted him, and he made sure they remembered it too. As his reach expanded, he began getting invited to private dinners, the kind where senators whispered over oysters and governors asked questions they already knew the answers to. Arnold rarely spoke. When he did, it was brief, surgical. He once sat across from a congressman who wanted help, understanding the city's underworld. Arnold looked at him and said, "You don't need to understand it, you just need to let it breathe." The congressman nodded. 2 weeks later, he voted against a crackdown bill. No one connected the dots, but they all felt the pressure. By 1924, Rothstein was no longer just a gambler or even a bootlegger. He was a kingmaker, a man who didn't care about headlines because he wrote them, a man who didn't care about elections because he decided them. And he still moved like he always had, quiet, polite, calculated. He'd show up to City Hall once every few months just to visit an old friend or drop off a donation. He never stayed long, never left a trace. But every time he walked through those doors, the halls went quiet. One aide once said, "He doesn't walk like a criminal. He walks like a man who already knows what you're going to say before you say it." And yet, with all this power, all this reach, he still couldn't sleep. Not well. He'd lie in bed at night, one hand behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Not anxious, just waiting for the mistake, the slip, the wrong word said in the wrong room. Because he knew the truth. The more people owe you, the more they fear you. And fear, it always turns on its master, eventually. One night, after a quiet dinner with 2 judges and a bishop, he walked alone through Central Park, hat low, hands in his coat. His bodyguard offered to walk with him. Arnold shook his head. Too many people watching. Let them see I'm not afraid. But even he knew. The game was changing. You can only pull so many strings before they tangle. And somewhere, out there in the city he owned, someone was planning to cut the puppet master down. But not yet. For now. He still controlled the board. In the summer of 1925, the nights got hotter, and Rothstein's world got colder. Everything still ran. The liquor lines, the gambling halls, the cards, the cash, the favors. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The silence that once comforted him began to feel like a threat. Not loud, not direct, just present, like a slow creak in a locked room. He knew the signs. In this life, you don't die from gunfire, not first. You die from hesitation, from glances, from loyalty wearing thin. And lately, the eyes around him didn't hold the same fear. They held calculation. It started with George, Fat Georgie Menschel, one of Rothstein's oldest runners. Georgie had been with him since the pool hall days when they were barely shaving and just figuring out how to fake confidence at a card table. He wasn't smart, but he was loyal. Always followed orders, never asked questions. Then Rothstein got a whisper from a bartender he paid on Canal Street. "Georgie's been flashing too much cash." "Everyone's flashing cash." "Yeah, but he's doing it in Harlem, and he's drinking, talking, running with guys that ain't yours." Rothstein thanked him, left a $100 bill under the coaster. That night, he called Georgie into his office, the one with the low lamp and the ashtray no one ever used. "You've been busy," Arnold said softly. Georgie laughed, nervous. "Business is good." "Business is mine," Rothstein replied. Georgie sat up straighter. "You think I'm stealing?" Arnold didn't blink. "I think you forgot who gave you the seat you're sitting in." There was a long silence. Then Georgie leaned back, smiled. But the smile was crooked now. "I made you plenty." "You made me nothing," Rothstein said. "I let you keep a cut." Another pause. Georgie stood. "Maybe I want more than a cut." And just like that, a 15-year friendship snapped like a cheap cue stick. Arnold let him leave that night, didn't say a word. But 3 days later, Georgie got pinched in a liquor raid. The kind that didn't usually happen unless someone tipped the cops where to look. They found $40,000 in illegal whiskey and a revolver he didn't have a license for. Georgie never got a trial. He got a sentence. Rothstein didn't visit. Didn't need to. Lesson learned. But Georgie wasn't the only crack in the wall. There was Morris Mo Lipkin, a quiet accountant with shaky hands and the memory of an elephant. Mo had balanced Rothstein's ledger since the Black Sox days, knew every shipment, every payoff, every secret deal. And now, he wanted out. He came to Rothstein trembling, eyes darting like a hunted man. "I can't sleep anymore, Arnold." "Then see a doctor." "I see blood when I close my eyes. Numbers start floating." Arnold stared at him. "You're not built for this, Mo." "No," Mo whispered. "I never was." "Then why stay so long?" Mo looked up, voice barely a breath. "Because I thought you were different." Rothstein poured him a drink. Mo didn't touch it. "Tell me what you want," Rothstein said. Mo hesitated. "A train ticket to Chicago. No one follows. I'll disappear." Arnold nodded. That night he gave Mo the ticket, envelope, cash, soft pat on the shoulder. 2 days later, Mo's train derailed in Ohio. Front page news said, "Accident." Arnold never read the paper that morning. Didn't need to. The problem wasn't that people were leaving. The problem was they were leaving with pieces of him. And he'd built his empire like a vault, every lock depending on another. If too many men took keys with them, it wouldn't matter how strong the walls were. It would fall. So he tightened his circle, stopped taking visitors without an appointment, cut down on meetings. He only saw 2 people regularly now, Nathan Selzer, his personal lawyer, and Frankie the Fox Marino, the only man Rothstein trusted to carry a gun in the same room as him. Frankie was different. He wasn't a thug. He was military, precise, quiet. Rothstein had pulled him out of a murder charge in 21, buried it with a bribe, and gave him a job. Frankie never smiled, never joked, but he never hesitated. Rothstein kept him close because he understood something most men didn't. Fear is loyalty, until it turns. Frankie didn't fear him. He respected him. That was rarer. But even Frankie had started asking questions. One night, while cleaning a pistol on Rothstein's couch, he asked, "You think one of your boys is going to try it?" Arnold didn't look up. "They already have." "You want names?" "I already know them." Frankie paused. "So what's the move?" Arnold finally looked at him. "Nothing yet. I want them to think I don't see it." Paranoia wasn't eating Rothstein. It was fueling him. He started recording his meetings, quietly, secretly, a wire hidden in a drawer. He wrote every name in a notebook he kept under his pillow. He stopped sleeping at his penthouse, rotated apartments every week, no pattern, no schedule. He fired his driver and started taking cabs from different corners of the city. He stopped eating out, had meals brought in by boys who didn't know his name. He even changed the combination to his private vault 3 times in 1 week. Because the truth was this: Rothstein wasn't afraid of the cops, or the feds, or the law. He was afraid of the men he made rich, because rich men with nothing left to earn are dangerous. They start thinking about legacy, revenge, freedom, and freedom in their minds meant no more Arnold. One night he met with Thomas "Tommy" Arsenault, a slick bootlegger from uptown who'd built half his empire off Rothstein's shipments. Tommy smiled too much, smelled too good, and had started wearing watches he couldn't afford 5 months ago. Arnold served him a drink, watched him sip. "You've been buying from other crews," he said. Tommy froze. "No, sir." Arnold held up a hand. "I'm not angry." Tommy relaxed. "I just need you to confirm it." Pause. Tommy nodded, slowly. "I had to. Your shipments were late." Arnold's eyes didn't blink. "You could have called." "I did." "You should have called again." Silence. Arnold stood. "Tommy, it's not the betrayal that bothers me." Tommy waited. "It's the idea that you thought I wouldn't find out." That night, Tommy's speakeasy got raided by the very same police Rothstein paid. Liquor seized, bank account frozen, license revoked. By morning, he was broke. By noon, he was missing. Rothstein started writing in a journal he never let anyone see. Each night, he wrote one question at the top of the page: "Who will betray me next?" Then he listed names. Some he circled, some he underlined, some he crossed out. He never burned the pages. He just turned them, like cards in a deck only he could play. In October, he took a drive with Frankie the Fox, no destination, just motion, air, distance. They stopped by the water, staring at the skyline. Frankie lit a cigarette, offered one. Rothstein shook his head. "You ever regret it?" Frankie asked. "What?" "Any of it." Rothstein watched the smoke rise. "I regret not sleeping better." Frankie smirked. "That's it?" "That's everything." Because Rothstein wasn't losing his grip on the streets. He was losing his grip on people. And once that goes, the empire's just scaffolding. There's a saying among card players: the moment you start watching your friends more than your cards, you've already lost the hand. Rothstein knew it, and he was watching everyone, because he wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying not to lose, and that's a far more dangerous game. There's a peculiar discomfort in seeing your younger self reflected in someone else, not in the obvious ways, not in looks or age, but in intent. In the way they speak less than they should, the way they calculate while others celebrate, the way they seem unbothered. Unbothered by wealth, by danger, by consequence. That was how Rothstein felt the first time he met Benjamin Siegel. They called him Bugsy, but Rothstein hated that nickname. It was given by the kind of men who couldn't see past the wild in a young man's eyes. They took that wildness as stupidity. But Rothstein knew better. Bugsy was a wolf, not a mad dog. And wolves were exactly the kind of men who didn't bark before they bit. He'd heard of him before they met. Stories filtered up like smoke from the streets of Brooklyn. A kid running errands for Meyer Lansky. A boy who killed 2 men in one night and walked home in a clean shirt. A charmer, a killer, a gambler, a storm in a good suit. But he didn't pay attention until Meyer himself called Rothstein's office. "He's smart," Meyer said. "He's got eyes like yours." Arnold frowned. "Then why are you sending him to me?" "Because he listens to me now," Meyer said. "He won't always." They met at a cigar lounge Rothstein sometimes used for quiet introductions. Red velvet booths, thick smoke, no clocks. Bugsy showed up 10 minutes early. That impressed Rothstein. Punctuality was the first sign of respect. He wore a navy jacket, brown shoes, no tie. Arrogant, but not careless. He sat without waiting to be offered a seat. Rothstein said nothing for a full minute, just watched him light his cigarette with a silver case. Finally he spoke. "You've killed men." Bugsy didn't flinch. "You haven't?" Rothstein gave a half smile. "Not with bullets." "Ah," Bugsy said, leaning back. "You're that kind of killer." They talked for an hour. Not about money, not about territory. They talked about control. Bugsy told a story about shaking down a numbers runner in Queens. The runner offered him cash, begged, pulled out a photograph of his daughter. Bugsy said he took the photo, looked at it, and told the man, "She'll grow up fine." "You won't." He didn't kill him. He just let the man know he could. Rothstein nodded. "That's how power speaks," he said, "without volume." Bugsy leaned in. "That's why I came to you. For the first time in years, Rothstein felt something that was almost admiration. This boy, barely 20, moved like a man who'd already survived a dozen lifetimes. And yet, there was a danger in it, because Rothstein saw the flaw too. Bugsy enjoyed it, the thrill, the violence, the attention. Where Rothstein was cold, Bugsy was fire. Where Rothstein built walls, Bugsy smashed doors. And Rothstein knew fire spreads fast, too fast. He brought him into the periphery of the business. Not close, but not far. He had Bugsy run deliveries to clubs on the east side, test the boy's ability to stay silent, to carry weight without showing it. Bugsy passed. Then came tougher assignments. Negotiating a dock deal with a union rep who liked waving guns. Bugsy didn't flinch, settling a debt dispute between two rival numbers crews in Spanish Harlem. Bugsy didn't take sides, he took control. And Rothstein started letting him into deeper rooms, not because he trusted him, but because he respected the threat. In late August, they met again, this time at a horse track in Yonkers. Bugsy stood beside him at the rail, watching the race without blinking. "That one's gonna break late," he said, nodding at a chestnut stallion. "You think so?" "I know so. Look at the hind legs. He's been favoring the left since the paddock." Rothstein raised an eyebrow. "You watch horses?" Bugsy smiled. "I watch everything." The horse broke late. Rothstein said nothing, but inside a gear clicked. He invited Bugsy to a private poker game 2 weeks later. One of Rothstein's personal rituals, not about cards, but about character. The room was dim, the air tight with smoke and bourbon. 6 men at the table, all killers, liars, and cheats. Bugsy took a seat and played slow, lost the first 3 hands, then folded 5 in a row. Someone at the table, a crooked politician with too much gin in his veins, laughed. "You playing or sleeping?" Bugsy didn't look at him, just played the next hand, one, then the next, and the next. He left with more cash than Rothstein had given him that month. On the way out, Bugsy leaned in and said, "You should have put me at a harder table." That night, Rothstein wrote in his notebook, "Bugsy equals useful, dangerous, will turn on me eventually. Watch carefully." It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern. The same pattern he'd seen in a dozen men before they broke from the leash. Too smart, too ambitious, too fast. Arnold knew what happened when a man with hunger got too close to the throne. He invited Bugsy for dinner, just the two of them. High-rise apartment, clean view of the city. Nothing on the table but roast duck and a bottle of scotch. Bugsy leaned on the window. "You ever get tired of all this?" he asked. "No." "Of watching every move? Sleeping with one eye open?" Rothstein didn't answer. Bugsy turned. "I think you do." Rothstein finally looked at him. "And what do you think happens if I stop?" Bugsy shrugged. "You lose it." "And then?" Bugsy smiled. "Then someone like me takes it." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was respectful, honest. Rothstein nodded. "You're not wrong. But it's not your time yet." Bugsy poured himself a drink. "And who decides when it is?" Rothstein's voice didn't rise. "I do." They didn't speak again for 3 weeks, not because of conflict, but because the understanding had been made. They were no longer mentor and student. They were rivals with patience. Rothstein began testing him, subtly. He sent Bugsy to negotiate a weapons deal with a crew from Philadelphia, told them to lowball. Bugsy came back with the deal and the guns. Then Rothstein heard a rumor. Bugsy had threatened one of the Philly bosses at knife point behind a bar. No witnesses, just a whisper. When asked, Bugsy smiled and said, "I negotiated." Rothstein didn't press, but he made another note. "Too aggressive, cannot be controlled forever." One night, Frankie the Fox sat across from Rothstein and asked, "You want me to watch him?" Arnold shook his head. "Why not?" "Because he knows we're watching." "Then what's the move?" "We wait." "Until?" Rothstein exhaled. "Until he makes a mistake." But deep down, Rothstein wasn't sure that mistake would ever come. Because Bugsy wasn't a copy of Rothstein. He was the evolution, a faster, looser, more reckless version, still calculating, but willing to spill blood in places Rothstein never would. still quiet, but burning inside. And Rothstein saw what that meant. His time was ending. Not tomorrow, not next month, but soon. Because when men like Bugsy rise, they don't wait politely. They take. The game hadn't changed, but the players had. And Arnold Rothstein, once the quiet king of every room, now sat across from a boy who could play the same hand, faster, sharper, and without fear. He watched the skyline that night and whispered to himself, "I've trained the man who will bury me." And he almost smiled. Almost. Because there was a certain peace in knowing the crown would fall to someone who at least understood why it mattered. By fall of 1925, Rothstein's empire was quieter than ever, and that was the problem. The streets still paid tribute, the liquor still flowed, the dice still turned, his offices were clean, his men obedient, and his name still sent ripples through the dark corners of New York. But Rothstein felt the silence pressing on his chest. It wasn't the calm before a storm. It was the calm after one, the kind that means the water's retreating because something big is coming next. He'd learned over the years that empires don't fall from gunshots. They fall from paperwork, from numbers that stop adding up, from names that disappear, from eyes that no longer look afraid. It was his bookkeeper, a twitchy new hire named Simon Beller, who brought the first whisper of it. Simon wasn't sharp, but he was honest, and that counted for something in Rothstein's world. He came into the office one morning, sweating through his collar, holding a ledger close to his chest like it was a holy book. "I think there's a mistake," Simon said. "There are no mistakes in my books," Rothstein said flatly. "No, sir," Simon stammered, "but I double-checked the accounts. The liquor payouts from the West Docks, they're short. Nearly $50,000." Rothstein narrowed his eyes. "In 1 quarter? In 1 month?" Rothstein didn't panic. He didn't even speak. He just turned to his calendar, made a note, and told Simon to go get lunch. Then he sat in silence for nearly an hour, turning over every piece of the operation in his mind. He hadn't been sloppy. He hadn't loosened the leash. But someone had. And if $50,000 had gone missing, it meant someone close to him had bet he wouldn't notice. They were wrong. There were only 5 men who had access to that particular ledger, and only one who had the power to make that kind of cash move without raising flags. Nathan Selzer, his lawyer, his clean man, the one who shook hands in City Hall and signed papers Arnold didn't want to see. They had met in 1918, when Selzer had helped make a gambling charge disappear in under 24 hours. Since then, he had become more than an attorney. He was a gatekeeper. But gatekeepers control the keys. And Rothstein had been too focused on rivals, on firebrands like Bugsy, on petty bootleggers trying to sell watered-down whiskey on his turf. He'd ignored the quiet ones. That was a mistake. He called Selzer in that evening. The office was dark, as always. The lamp on Rothstein's desk cast a soft yellow glow across the polished wood, and the air smelled of dust and expensive tobacco. Selzer entered calm, smiling. Too calm. "You wanted to see me?" Rothstein didn't return the smile. "I'm missing $50,000. Selzer's lips twitched just a little. "From where?" "You know from where." A pause. Selzer sat. "Arnold, you know as well as I do, things move. Numbers shift. Could be delayed transfers, could be an undercount." "Don't lie to me," Rothstein said, voice soft as smoke. Selzer straightened in his chair. "You think I'd steal from you?" "I think someone did, and the only person who wouldn't be afraid to try is the one who believes he can out-talk the consequences." Selzer's jaw tensed. Just for a second. Then he leaned forward. "You don't scare me like you used to, Arnold." There it was. The slip. The real sentence. Rothstein sat back, staring. "You've been helping the Uptown crew?" Silence. "The Hell's Kitchen boys. The ones who lost half their whiskey roots after I took the 9th Avenue Club." Another pause. Then Selzer spoke, slower. "They came to me first. Said they'd split the roots. Said you were pulling back, getting old, getting paranoid." Rothstein blinked. "And you believed them?" Selzer smiled, tight, bitter. I stopped believing in you when you let Bugsy into your meetings. That boy's a storm. You brought him to the front gate and handed him the map. Arnold tapped his fingers slowly on the desk. So you betrayed me. I rebalanced the table. You tried to steal my empire. Seltzer leaned forward, eyes sharp now. No, Arnold. I tried to survive it. You built a kingdom on fear. But fear fades. You can't scare the next generation. They laugh at your silence now. Another long pause. Then Rothstein stood. You've got two options, he said. You can walk out of here, go to Chicago, disappear, never touch a dollar that smells like mine again. And the second option? You stay, and you bleed. Seltzer laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was bitter, defeated. I suppose this is where Frankie walks in. No, Rothstein said. Why not? Because you'll leave. You'll take the train. You'll feel safe. You'll check into a hotel and think maybe I meant it. Seltzer's smile vanished. And then? Rothstein stepped close. Then you die on the second night, in your sleep, maybe in the lobby, maybe with a pillow over your face, but quietly, and without glory. Seltzer nodded, lips tight. You always were good at stories. No, Rothstein said. I'm good at endings. Seltzer left that night. He never made it to Chicago. Never made it past Pennsylvania. Gunshot to the chest in a hotel lobby. Wrong place, wrong time, the paper said. No arrest, no witnesses, no one looked twice. Rothstein didn't attend the funeral. But even after Seltzer's death, the betrayal lingered. Because it wasn't just the money, it was the message. They don't fear you anymore. He saw it everywhere now, in the way men paused before saying, yes, sir, in the sideways glances at his clubs and the tightened smiles of his old allies. His empire was still standing, but the termites were chewing through the beams. He met Bugsy a week later, in a dim cigar room uptown. The boy leaned in, smiling like a man who already knew the punchline. Heard about Seltzer, Bugsy said. Pity. He was a good liar. Rothstein didn't respond. You think it's over? Bugsy asked. No, Rothstein said. You think someone else is behind it? I know someone is. Bugsy leaned back. Well, he said, if you need help sorting things out. I don't, Rothstein cut him off. Bugsy raised his eyebrows. No offense, Rothstein said, but I don't ask the wolf to guard the henhouse. Bugsy grinned. But you still feed the wolf, don't you? That night, Rothstein lay awake in bed. He hadn't slept well in years, but this night was different. He wasn't replaying old betrayals, he was calculating new ones. Because if Seltzer had been bold enough to skim from him, that meant there were more. If the Hell's Kitchen crew thought they could get away with peeling off pieces of his operation, that meant they were being protected. Politically, publicly, from the inside. And the only way to root it out was to burn the whole damn garden. He started pulling out, closed 3 clubs, shut down 2 warehouses, not out of weakness, but to flush the rats. And they scurried fast. Men who'd been loyal for years suddenly vanished. Others begged for meetings, explanations, forgiveness. But Rothstein had no time left for apologies. He became surgical, precise. 3 names removed in 2 weeks. 2 crews dismantled. 1 judge bought again, just to ensure the press never wrote the real story. Rothstein didn't scream, didn't fight. He trimmed the fat like a butcher carving a perfect cut of meat. But even as he cleaned house, he knew something was coming. Not the law, not the competition, something personal. He could feel it in the way his men moved, in the way Frankie the Fox stopped looking him in the eye. He saw it in the way Bugsy smiled too easily now, and he felt it in his chest, like a weight no bribe could lift. The betrayal hadn't stopped. It had only begun. Arnold Rothstein had built his kingdom on many things: fear, precision, favors owed, silence bought. But beneath all of it, beneath the empires and the ledgers and the quiet nods that made men disappear, there was one thing he never built on. Love, not friendship, not loyalty, certainly not family. Those were weaknesses, too easily turned, too unpredictable to control. He never had children. He never married for love. His heart was something he kept under glass, like an antique pistol, still deadly, but never touched. So when Meyer Lansky called him Pop the first time, over a private dinner in 1921, Arnold didn't know whether to laugh or be afraid. He'd taken a liking to Meyer early on. The boy had a mind built for numbers and nerves built for war. He didn't blink when things got dark. He didn't flinch when money got heavy. And most importantly, he didn't try to impress Rothstein. He learned from him. That was rare. He called Meyer his quiet investment. Now, 4 years later, that investment was returning with interest. Too much interest. In 1925, Meyer wasn't a boy anymore. He was 23, clean-shaven, cold-eyed, already running parts of lower Manhattan and slicing into Brooklyn's numbers rackets without spilling a drop of unnecessary blood. He still came to Rothstein when he was called. Still said, "Yes, sir." Still kissed the ring, so to speak. But the tone had shifted. Not rebellion, not yet, but the air of independence. The kind that comes when a man realizes he doesn't need anyone to hold the door open for him anymore. And Rothstein saw it, felt it, in every step Meyer took into his office. It started with a conversation. Short, nothing special. A whiskey shared late in the evening, both men standing by the window, looking over the city. "You ever think about getting out?" Meyer asked. Rothstein's brow furrowed. "Out of what?" "This," Meyer said, motioning toward the skyline. "All of it." "No." "Not once?" "No." Meyer nodded. "That's the difference between you and me." Rothstein didn't respond. He just watched Meyer's reflection in the window. The kid wasn't asking permission. He was warning him. A week later, Frankie the Fox came into the office with a folder. Manila. Plain. Inside, it was a copy of a property deed. Warehouse in Crown Heights under a shell company. Laundered. But Rothstein recognized the money trail, and it led to Meyer Lansky. It wasn't the warehouse that mattered. It was the cargo moving through it. Guns, liquor, cash, independent routes, untaxed, unapproved, moving through Rothstein's own districts, without so much as a nod of respect. Frankie closed the folder. "You want me to make a call?" Rothstein stared at the desk for a long time, then said, "No." "Why not?" "Because I raised this one." That night, Rothstein didn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the lights flickering in the tenements below. He thought of Meyer's first card game, when the kid was only 17, skinny, sharp. Played 3 hands, lost 2, won the 3rd so cleanly, Rothstein had to stop the game and look at him twice. He remembered giving him his first envelope job, a test. Meyer came back with every dollar accounted for and a note tucked inside. "You overpaid your man on 13th Street by $7.62. Rothstein had smiled that day. He hadn't smiled much since. He invited Meyer to dinner. Private booth, dark room, silver knives, not a single bottle on the table. "You've been busy," Rothstein said. Meyer didn't blink. "I stay busy." "You opened a warehouse in Crown Heights." Pause. "Who told you?" "You just did." Another pause. Then Meyer smiled. "Guess I'm not as quiet as I thought." Rothstein leaned forward. "I built you." "You did. And now you're running routes without cutting me in." "I wasn't trying to cut you out." "No?" Rothstein said. "Then what were you doing?" Meyer didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them stretched so long, it became its own kind of conversation. Finally, Rothstein spoke. "You know what happens next?" Meyer stared back. "I'm not Selzer." "I know. I'm not Bugsy either." Rothstein's voice dropped. "Bugsy's just waiting to shoot someone. You're waiting to become someone." "And what's wrong with that?" "Nothing," Rothstein said. He picked up his glass. "Sons are supposed to outgrow their fathers. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because power doesn't fade peacefully." 3 days later, one of Rothstein's trucks was hijacked, not by street thugs, not by some random crew, by Meyer's men. Clean job, no shots fired, just a rerouted delivery, a fake invoice, and a team of drivers who suddenly decided they didn't want to work for Rothstein anymore. The message was clear: "We don't need your protection." Rothstein sat in his office, hands folded on the desk. Frankie stood by the door, watching. "You want me to pick him up?" Frankie asked. Rothstein didn't respond. "He betrayed you." "No," Rothstein whispered. He graduated. Still, something inside Arnold cracked. Not rage, not even heartbreak, just certainty that the thing he had tried to avoid, attachment, had still found its way into his bones. And now it was costing him. Because he couldn't kill Meyer. He couldn't even threaten him, not because he was weak, because he meant too much. And that was the most dangerous position Rothstein had ever allowed himself to be in. So he took the other path. He called Meyer, asked him to meet. Neutral ground. A synagogue basement in Flatbush neither of them had ever used before. They met in silence. No guards, no guns, just a table, 2 chairs, and the weight of everything that had come before. Rothstein spoke first. You've taken from me. Meyer said nothing. You're building something new. Still silence. I should be angry. Now Meyer looked at him. But I'm not, Rothstein said. I know, Meyer whispered. You're going to run this city one day, Rothstein said. Maybe the whole country. Meyer didn't flinch. You've got vision. You've got nerve. You've got what I used to have. He leaned in, but don't mistake my silence for surrender. Meyer nodded. I never have. Rothstein stood. So go. And Meyer did. That night, Rothstein wrote one final note in his journal. He was the closest thing I had to a son, and I taught him everything he'll use to destroy me. By late 1925, the world had shifted under Rothstein's shoes. He still walked with his chin up, still moved like he owned the air in every room, but those who looked closely saw the cracks. The slight pause before he spoke, the longer stares at ledgers, the quietness that was no longer calculated but heavy. He had cleaned his empire, cut the rot, punished betrayal, but the kingdom had thinned, and now, in a moment of exhaustion, pride, and cold calculation, he made the one move he had long taught others never to make. He gambled. The game wasn't a street hustle. It wasn't one of his polished affairs with whispered rules and silent dealers. It wasn't even a play for power. It was a poker game, old-fashioned, brutal, high stakes, and stupid. It happened at the Park Central Hotel, the kind of place where the velvet never aged, where the staff knew not to knock, where reputations could be made and buried in the same room. It was November 1st, and the air outside was sharp as a blade. Inside, the room was smoky, dim, close. 6 men sat around the table. Most of them were nobodies in nice suits, except one, George Jaime Fishbein. A gambler, yes, but also a loan shark, a hustler, and a man with a memory like a ledger. He never forgave a debt, never forgot a word. Arnold shouldn't have been there. He knew it. Frankie had said as much the night before. Why sit down with men you used to own? Rothstein had shrugged. Because they don't know they've already lost. But this time, they hadn't. Not yet. The cards didn't fall his way. For 4 hours, he played tight, precise, the way he always had. He lost slowly, methodically, bleeding chips with grace, and then came the final hand. A full pot. $320,000. Rothstein didn't blink, didn't even hesitate. He pushed in, calm and deliberate. Fishbein called, and when the cards turned, Rothstein lost, straight beaten by a flush. He sat still, didn't flinch, didn't protest, just folded his hands and said, "Send me the bill." That was it. That's all he said. And then he stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked out into the November night like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just lost more money than most men would see in a lifetime. But Fishbein wasn't a man who believed in patience. 2 days later, the message arrived. Pay by the 5th or face consequences. Rothstein ignored it. Another came, then another. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have the money, but because he didn't believe he should have to pay. He told Frankie, it was a dirty hand. Frankie asked, "You think they cheated?" "I know they did." "Then why'd you play?" Rothstein stared at the wall. "Because I needed to see who'd look me in the eye when I lost." Still, the pressure mounted. Fishbein started circling. Let it slip to others that Rothstein was getting soft, that he ran from a loss like a punk. The whispers started again. He's slipping. He lost his edge. He can't cover his own debts. Men Rothstein once made rich stopped returning calls. The city he'd built on silence and precision was turning into a carnival of rumors. Worse still, he began noticing faces watching him too long. Cars parked outside buildings longer than they should have. Whispers that didn't quiet when he entered the room. And then, someone tried to follow him. A young kid, maybe 20. Rothstein noticed, stopped, turned, walked right up to him. "Tell Fishbein he doesn't have to send boys." The kid looked stunned. I don't know what you mean." Rothstein stepped closer, calm, cold. "You followed the wrong man." Then he slipped the boy $100 bill and walked away. By the evening of November 4th, the city was buzzing, not with celebration, but with something more dangerous: anticipation. They all knew something was about to happen, and Rothstein, despite every lesson he had taught himself, didn't run. He had cleaned his suits, paid his drivers, polished his shoes, as if preparing for court, not conflict, as if death could be postponed by discipline. He had one last meeting that day, with Meyer. He called for him, and Meyer came, not late, not early, just on time, like a man showing respect but no longer fear. They met in a hotel bar, sat in the corner, didn't drink. Rothstein said, "They think I'm finished." Meyer said nothing. "They think I can't pay. They think I won't fight." Still silence. "I never asked you for anything, Meyer." Meyer looked at him then. "And what do you want now?" Rothstein's voice was quiet. "Cover the debt." Pause, long, heavy. Meyer leaned back. "No." Rothstein didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "I taught you everything," he said. "You did," Meyer said. "And the first thing you taught me was never pay a debt you don't owe." Another pause. Rothstein nodded. "Then this is how it ends." Meyer stood. This is how it always ends." And he walked out. At 10:30 p.m., November 4th, Rothstein received a phone call. A quiet voice, a new poker game, a chance to win back what he lost. He said yes. He put on his coat, straightened his tie, tipped the hotel doorman on his way out, and walked to the Park Central Hotel. He entered through the rear, took the elevator up, stepped into the room. It wasn't a game. It was a setup. There was no table, no chips, just a man with a gun and a name on his breath. "Fishbein says hello." The shot rang out just once, right to the gut. Not the head, not the chest. The gut, a message. Slow death, the kind that gives you time to reflect on every single wrong step. They left him there, bleeding, alone. They rushed him to the hospital, Bellevue. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared at the ceiling like it was another bad hand. The cops came, asked questions. "Who shot you, Arnold?" He smiled, faintly, softly, and said, "You stick to your trade. I'll stick to mine." Arnold Rothstein died 2 days later, November 6th, 1928, age 46. No last words, no confession, no debt paid, just a man who played every angle until the table turned against him. When Arnold Rothstein died, the city didn't scream. It shifted, quietly, unsettlingly, like a table with one leg sawed down just enough to tilt the balance. The newspapers ran it like a half story. Gambler slain in hotel shooting. Rothstein dies, doesn't name killer. Silence to the end. They didn't understand. They saw a man in a gray suit shot in a hotel room. A man who bet too high, lost too big, and paid the price. But what they missed, what the politicians, bankers, and street hustlers all knew, was that Rothstein wasn't just another gambler. He was the hinge. The man who held everything together. Gangs who hated each other but shared his liquor roots. Judges who condemned crime by day and took envelopes from him by night. Young wolves like Lansky and Siegel, who studied him the way priests study scripture. Cops who arrested his enemies and ignored his shipments. Bankers who lent him money because they knew they'd never lose it. And now, he was gone. And every man left behind wanted a piece of what he'd built. It started with the liquor roots. Rothstein had run booze like a surgeon, clean, scheduled, predictable. Now, with him gone, his lieutenants began arguing over territory like dogs with meat thrown between them. Frankie the Fox made the first move. He seized the downtown docks, said he was protecting Rothstein's legacy. But everyone knew what that meant. He was carving out his own empire, and fast. Within 3 days, he had 3 warehouses flying his name, 24 men in black cars moving crates without clearance, and at least 1 crooked customs officer on his payroll. Then came Bugsy Siegel. He didn't say a word to anyone for a week after Rothstein died, just disappeared. People thought maybe he'd vanished, moved on, laid low. He hadn't. He'd gone north, Harlem, the Bronx, Hell's Kitchen, and started buying up speakeasies and gambling halls that had once quietly paid tribute to Rothstein. Only now they paid directly to Bugsy, or they didn't open at all. Meanwhile, Meyer Lansky stayed silent, the calmest of them all. He didn't move fast, he didn't raise his voice, he just made phone calls, lots of them, to Chicago, to Jersey, to Tampa, to men Rothstein had once warned him about, and now Meyer was aligning with them. Because Meyer didn't want pieces of Rothstein's empire. He wanted the whole blueprint, and he was going to modernize it. But not everyone was blood. Not everyone moved like they'd earned something. There were outsiders, small-time gangsters, Irish and Italian crews, Harlem operators, who smelled weakness and started pushing in. Shootings began, trucks went missing, payoffs stopped arriving, and suddenly, New York was unstable again. One man, Big Eddie Roselli, a Jersey bootlegger, tried to take Rothstein's old Queens route. He showed up at one of Rothstein's former warehouses with 5 men, 2 cars, and a bottle of bootleg bourbon as a gift. The foreman didn't answer his call. 2 hours later, the warehouse was found burning, 5 bodies charred inside. No one claimed it, but everyone knew Bugsy had made his first statement. Then came the meeting. The wake without a casket. It happened in the back room of an old billiard hall in Midtown, 3 days after Rothstein's burial. No press, no families, just the players, Meyer, Bugsy, Frankie. 3 of Rothstein's most dangerous ghosts sitting at a table like a council that didn't want to exist. No handshakes, no smiles, just the heavy silence Rothstein himself had once mastered. Meyer spoke first. Everyone wants the throne. Frankie lit a cigarette. There is no throne. There's just turf. Bugsy chuckled. You both sound like amateurs. Meyer turned to him. This isn't about bullets, Bugsy. Not anymore. Bugsy leaned back. Then why are so many people dying? No one answered. The plan was simple. On paper, divide the routes, split the clubs, keep the judges greased, make peace. But none of them trusted each other, because each one of them had once sat at Rothstein's table, waiting for the day the king died. Now the king was gone, and no one wanted to be a prince. They wanted to rule. Outside the billiard hall, a young runner passed a note to Frankie. He read it once, twice, then smiled. Chicago just backed Meyer, he said. Bugsy cracked his knuckles. So now it's official. This city's not yours. Meyer stood slowly. It never was. And he left. Just like that. The days that followed were chaos. Not war, not yet. But something colder. Backroom betrayals, men switching allegiances overnight, clubs torched, shipments hijacked. The entire structure Rothstein had spent a decade building was coming undone. Not because of outside enemies, but because no one could wear his crown. There was a man named Charlie Luciano waiting in the wings. A young Italian from the Lower East Side, once dismissed by Rothstein as too reckless, too loud. Now, he was watching from the shadows, building alliances, absorbing muscle, speaking softly to both Meyer and Bugsy. Because Charlie didn't want to inherit Rothstein's empire. He wanted to rebuild it under a new name, the Commission. But that's another story. As for Rothstein's personal belongings, gone, auctioned, claimed, scattered. His suits went to dry cleaners who never returned them. His watches went to pawn shops where desperate men stared through the glass. His home was emptied before the will was even read. And the ledger, the one he kept hidden under his pillow, full of names and debts, vanished. Some say Bugsy took it. Some say Meyer burned it. But no one ever saw it again. At the funeral, only a dozen people stood at the graveside. No headlines, no priest, no tears, just a cold November wind and a rabbi who barely knew his name. Bugsy didn't come. Frankie didn't either. But Meyer did. He stood still, hands in his coat, watching the coffin lower into the dirt. Someone beside him said, "You gonna say anything?" Meyer shook his head. No. Pause. He wouldn't want words, he'd want silence. And that was it. Arnold Rothstein, the brain, the gentleman gambler, the quiet king, was dead. And New York was burning slowly in the shadow of his absence. Long after the earth had settled over Rothstein's grave, long after the final whispers of his death faded into the static of New York streets, his legacy didn't die. It metastasized, not in marble, not in memory, in method. They didn't light candles for him. They didn't put his name in books or carve it on statues. But every corner of the criminal underworld, every speakeasy, every numbers racket, every judge with two pockets, one for the law and one for the bribe, carried his fingerprints. He hadn't ruled like Capone would. He hadn't spilled blood like Dutch Schultz. He hadn't played loud like Luciano. But what Arnold Rothstein did was show them how to make crime sustainable. And now, even dead, he was more present than ever. In the weeks after his funeral, the streets of New York underwent a quiet transformation, not in the flashing of guns or the thunder of car bombs, that would come later, but in the way men began to organize. Rothstein's most devout students, Meyer Lansky, Charles Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, and yes, even Bugsy Siegel, saw the vacuum he left not as a collapse, but a challenge. They didn't want his seat, they wanted his schematics. Because Rothstein hadn't just built a network, he'd built a system, a template. One that, if copied and scaled, could turn gangs into governments. And that was the true inheritance. It began with the numbers. Rothstein had always said, blood runs dry, but the math doesn't lie. So Meyer took the numbers rackets Rothstein had dabbled in and turned them into full-blown economies. Harlem, the Bronx, Bed-Stuy, communities with no banks, no safety nets, but plenty of hope and desperation. Meyer slipped in, partnered with local crews, and expanded the games, made them fairer, smarter, more attractive. Took Rothstein's quiet style and refined it. He didn't just run them, he ensured them, taught people to believe in the system, just like Rothstein had taught him. Meanwhile, Luciano watched the bootlegging routes. Where Rothstein had built clean lines from Canada and the Caribbean, Luciano layered them, connected them to Chicago, to New Orleans, to Havana. He kept Rothstein's rules, clean books, fast payouts, no heat. But he added one more, consensus. He began reaching out to crews Rothstein had refused to touch, Italians, Jews, Irish, even the black syndicates in uptown Harlem. Not to fight, to unite. Rothstein had said, a good empire is like a card game, small table, big stakes. Luciano wanted a conference table. He envisioned a world where the bosses didn't kill each other in alleyways. They shook hands behind curtained windows. The commission would come later. But its first blueprint was Rothstein's silence. And Bugsy, he took the violence Rothstein had buried and put it back in the open. Not sloppy, not reckless, strategic. He took Rothstein's calm intimidation and added teeth. You either pay like you're dealing with Arnold, he once said, or you bleed like you're dealing with me. And it worked. For a time. Because every criminal understood something they hadn't before Rothstein came along. Fear doesn't scale, but structure does. Behind closed doors, old-timers still whispered his name, not with affection, with reverence. They didn't say Rothstein used to run this city. They said, Rothstein taught this city how to run. Take the courts. Before Rothstein, bribing a judge was messy, dangerous, risky. He'd changed that. He'd used lawyers like architects, built paper trails that looked clean, payments that looked like donations, alliances that moved through city council without the stink of crime. Now, everyone did it. Luciano bribed city officials using the same schemes Rothstein had drawn up in a Central Park notebook. Lansky had Rothstein's old accountants on his payroll. Even Al Capone in Chicago took lessons from the man they called the Brain. He once asked, how'd that Jew keep the cops off his back for a decade? The answer? Rothstein didn't avoid cops. He owned them. Even in death, Rothstein kept winning. Because no one, not one man, ever proved he fixed the 1919 World Series. No one found his books. No one found the men who pulled the triggers on his enemies. No one found out who pulled the trigger on him. That silence, that ghost, it became the gold standard. Young gangsters began mimicking him. They stopped bragging, stopped shouting, started dressing better, talking slower, shaking hands with mayors and bishops and union bosses. Because they learned real power doesn't need to raise its voice. The politicians who once took Rothstein's bribes started looking for his replacements, only to find the replacements were already bigger than he'd been. Because Rothstein didn't create a dynasty. He created a doctrine, a how-to manual for organized crime, one so efficient, so intelligent, so deeply embedded into the bones of the city that no one could tell where business ended and crime began. In 1929, a year after his death, a judge who once dined at Rothstein's table was asked by a reporter if he believed the rumors that Rothstein had controlled the city's underworld. The judge sipped his tea, then said, "If Rothstein had controlled it, you wouldn't be asking that question. You'd be living in the world he built without knowing it." By 1931, Luciano had risen to power. By 1932, Lansky was orchestrating national casino operations. Bugsy was eyeing the West, Las Vegas, a dry patch of dirt soon to become the biggest gambling city in the world. And every one of them still quoted Rothstein's lessons. Control the outcome, not the risk. Fear fades, debt doesn't. Your name only matters when it isn't being said. But time forgets everything, even legends. As the decades passed, Rothstein became a ghost in the background of gangster folklore. Replaced in headlines by louder men, bloodier stories, louder names. He never got a movie in his own name, never got statues, never got credit. But every time a deal was made in silence, every time a crooked cop shook hands with a clean lawyer, or a kingpin moved money without moving a gun, Arnold Rothstein was in the room. There's a story that in 1942, a young gangster was being groomed for the big time. He asked Lansky, "Who taught you all this?" Lansky handed him a glass of rye, looked out the window, and said, "A man who never raised his voice, but could stop a city with a sentence." The kid asked, "What happened to him?" Meyer smiled, thin and quiet. He forgot his own rule. He bet on a game he didn't rig. That was Rothstein's final lesson, the one they never forgot. Don't bet what you can't control. Don't play a game just to prove you're still sharp. Don't rely on silence when the world's already shouting. But most of all, never believe your empire will mourn you. Because it won't. It will inherit you, imitate you, grow fat off your genius, then move on. And yet, even now, every time a man in a gray suit leans over a card table and folds before the river, every time a deal goes down in a polished room, without guns, without noise, every time power is felt, not shown, that's Rothstein. Still playing, still winning, still watching. By the time the 1940s began to simmer into the modern world, Arnold Rothstein had become a whisper, not a man, not even a story, but a kind of shadow in the background of someone else's legend. His name still showed up in old articles, a passing mention in a book about organized crime, footnotes in memoirs by men who once stood behind him and now stood on his memory. But ask a street hustler in Brooklyn who Arnold Rothstein was, and they'd say, "Didn't he fix a baseball game?" Or worse, "Never heard of him." And that was what Rothstein would have hated most. Not death, not betrayal, not even losing, but being forgotten. Because the man who once whispered in the ears of mayors, who made the law blink and blink again, who turned dirty money into clean power and then turned it into influence that could shape cities, was now just a question mark at the end of someone else's sentence. It didn't happen all at once. History never erases men like Rothstein in a single breath. It sands them down, slowly, quietly, like a city eats away at an old brick wall until only the dust remembers it used to be strong. At first, he was remembered through others. Meyer Lansky, who always called him the best teacher I ever had. Lucky Luciano, who once admitted, "We'd still be stabbing each other in alleys if Arnold hadn't taught us how to sit at a table." Frank Costello, who quoted Rothstein more often than he quoted his own father. But these men built newer empires, flashier ones, the kind that drew headlines. And soon, reporters stopped asking about the man who built the foundation, because the foundation is invisible once the tower is tall enough. One of the last real mentions came in 1947 in a Time magazine article about organized crime. The piece was titled, "The Invisible Hand, the Structure of American Vice." In a single paragraph, buried between photos of Luciano and Bugsy Siegel, a sentence read, "Many of the modern crime lords trace their discipline to the methods introduced by Arnold Rothstein, a gambler, an alleged fixer, killed in 1928 after a disputed poker debt." That was it. A name, a whisper, a shrug, as if the man had merely passed through history instead of shaping its underworld with cold fingers and clearer vision than any who came after. The buildings he once walked through, gone, torn down, rebuilt, rebranded. The clubs where he controlled entire boroughs from the back booth, now converted into cafes and jazz lounges with doormen who didn't know that once this place answered to the brain. Even the Park Central Hotel, where he took his final breath, had been remodeled by the 1950s. The room he was shot in no longer existed. The walls had been knocked down and turned into a banquet hall. People toasted weddings in the same space where Rothstein bled out, silent and proud to the end. And yet, even in obscurity, his methods endured. They'd become so efficient, so universal, that people stopped realizing they came from a man at all. They thought it was just how things were done, bribing judges through intermediaries instead of cash handoffs, using lawyers as messengers of criminal empires, turning illegal enterprises into polished businesses with fronts and fake ledgers, making crime look like order. That was Rothstein, but no one said his name. There's a story, maybe true, maybe myth, about a young district attorney in 1951. He was building a case against the Costello operation. In one of the surveillance transcripts, they caught a high-ranking member explaining a laundering route involving Canadian liquor shipments. The DA stared at the page and said, "How long have they been doing it like this?" An old detective in the room replied, "Since Arnold Rothstein." The DA frowned. "Who?" The room went quiet. Because it was the first time the old detective realized he'd lived long enough to watch a giant disappear. The historians didn't do him justice. They were too focused on Capone, on Luciano, on Bugsy and Lansky and the five families. Rothstein was too quiet, too subtle, too clean. There were no headlines with his mugshot, no trials that gripped the nation, no roaring last words. He died like he lived, half in the light, half in the dark, knowing more than anyone in the room but saying less. That made him harder to tell stories about. But not everyone forgot. In 1956, in a basement poker game off 10th Street, an old dealer named Benny Two Hats Caruso told a wide-eyed rookie, "Keep your hands clean, your books cleaner, and your mouth shut. Rothstein's rules still work." The rookie asked, "Who's Rothstein?" Benny smiled. "He's the reason you're sitting here instead of bleeding in a back alley, kid." Years passed. The world got louder. The crimes got bigger. Television turned gangsters into celebrities. JFK was president. Sinatra sang for politicians. The mob moved into Vegas, into Cuba, into Hollywood. The new world didn't have time for quiet men with neat ledgers and disciplined voices. Rothstein was a ghost in a new machine, still felt, never seen. In 1963, Meyer Lansky sat for an interview, rare, controlled, careful. The reporter asked, "Who taught you how to do all this?" Lansky paused, looked down at the table, then said, "There was a man. Jewish, didn't drink, didn't smile much, wore gray suits, ran the city without ever raising his voice. He taught me what power looked like." The reporter asked, "What happened to him?" Lansky said, "He bet on a game he couldn't control. They shot him, and the city hasn't been clean since." In the 1970s, the criminal world became clumsier. More guns, more heat, more sloppiness. The new generation didn't follow Rothstein's methods. They wanted headlines, not silence. Notebooks became bullet holes. The last men who knew him were either dead in prison or in Florida pretending they were retired. And the blueprint? still working, still used, still breathing, but no longer attributed. It wasn't until the early 2000s that historians began digging again. They found his name in old case files, found whispers of his influence in documents once sealed, found that his clean fingerprints were everywhere, even if no one knew to look. One professor, a crime historian at New York University, called him the architect of American organized crime, the invisible genius who taught killers how to wear suits and turn cities into chessboards. But it never made the front page. Just an academic paper, just another whisper. And yet, on East 35th Street, there's a tenement that still stands, refurbished now, shiny with steel and glass. In the lobby, there's no plaque, no sign, no mention. But if you ask the oldest man in the building, the one who smokes on the stoop in the early hours, he'll tell you, there used to be a boy who lived here, kept his shoes clean, talked quiet, watched people like they were books, said one day he'd own the whole city. I think his name was Arnie or something like that. That's legacy. Not in statues, not in stories, but in habits. The world forgets, it borrowed. It wasn't the pain that woke him after the gunshot. It was the cold. It came in slow, not a scream of fire, not the blinding chaos the stories would later tell, but a creeping numbness, like frost crawling across his ribs from the inside. Arnold Rothstein lay there on the polished floor of the Park Central Hotel, one hand tucked under his body, the other reaching toward something, a chair, a breath, an answer, but coming back with nothing. He didn't scream. He didn't even groan. He just breathed, shallow, slow, measured, like he still had control, like bleeding to death was just another situation to manage. In those first minutes, before anyone found him, before the walls knew what had happened, Rothstein's mind wasn't on revenge. Not on the face of the man who pulled the trigger. Not on fish buying. Not even on the debt. He was thinking of a streetlight on East 35th. A small memory, buried so deep in his brain it hadn't surfaced in years. He must have been 9, maybe 10. It had rained the night before. The street was dark and wet, the lamp buzzing softly like it was tired of burning. Arnold had watched it from his window, his breath fogging the glass, wondering how something so still could hum with power. That's how he'd always wanted to be. Still, but charged. He didn't think about heaven, didn't believe in it, didn't think about hell either, just thought about the folds. In cards, in life, everything came down to how you played the folds. You couldn't stop the hand from being dealt, but you could choose when to stay in and when to let go. He had taught that to boys who became kings, taught them to fold early, quietly, with dignity. And now, here he was, gut torn open, suit ruined, breath shallow, and he was still calculating. When the hotel staff found him, 20 minutes later, he was still alive. Barely. They said he looked calm, not peaceful, not proud, just like he'd expected this all along. The ambulance jolted. The driver cursed. He felt the wheels turning beneath him, felt the blood soaking into linen, the warm, metallic stench curling into his nostrils. He blinked once, twice, and then came the ghosts. First, his father, Rabbi Abraham Rothstein, tall, stern, lips always tight with judgment. Arnold never liked thinking of him. Too much shame there, too much disapproval. But now, in that strange in-between place between pain and death, he saw the old man's face clearly. He was sitting across a table, the Torah in one hand, a coin in the other. "What is this worth?" the ghost asked. Arnold answered softly in his mind, "Depends on who needs it." His father frowned. "And if they don't?" Rothstein blinked. "Then you wait." Next came Meyer, not the grown man, but the boy. Thin, bright-eyed, with ink stains on his cuffs and a habit of blinking twice before speaking. Arnold saw him sitting in that smoky back room, clutching his first envelope full of cash. "Am I doing this right?" the ghost Meyer asked. Arnold smiled, faint and dry. "You were always going to outgrow me." Then came Bugsy, not a ghost, but something else. A storm at the edge of the room, too wild to stay still, too young to die. He didn't speak. He just laughed, like the whole world was a setup and Rothstein had finally figured out the joke was on him. And then, Silzer, the lawyer who betrayed him. He looked tired now, older than when he died, still wearing the same smug smile, but the arrogance had faded. He looked at Rothstein and said, "You knew I'd fold. You just hoped I'd fold later." Arnold whispered through cracked lips, "You were never meant to last." As the gurney rolled into Bellevue Hospital, the air turned white, sterile, bright, loud. A nurse called his name. "Mr. Rothstein?" He didn't answer. She leaned close. "Can you hear me?" He blinked. Once. They pushed him into surgery. He wasn't unconscious the whole time. He floated in and out, heard voices, scalpel clinks, the breathing of machines. And between the moments of clarity, his mind drifted again. Not to money, not to women, not even to the men who betrayed him, but to the games. Poker tables, dice rooms, chalkboards filled with numbers, the thrill of watching men lie with their hands and betray themselves with their eyes. He remembered being 23, sitting in a smoke-choked gambling den in Jersey, watching a man bluff with a king high and smiling as if he'd won. Rothstein had called him, took his money, took his girl too, but he never took his dignity. That man had smiled on the way out. That's how Rothstein wanted to go, smiling. But he couldn't smile now, not with the tubes in his body, not with the drugs. So he blinked. That would have to do. The police came in later, asked him who shot him. He didn't name names, didn't lie, didn't even play coy. He just said, "You stick to your trade, I'll stick to mine." That was all they got. And that was enough. Because Rothstein had never needed to win the last hand. He just needed to play it on his terms. And he had. Even lying in a hospital bed, ribs shattered, stomach opened, the city already picking apart his empire like vultures at a banquet. He was still in control of the story. They said he died around 11:20 p.m. on November 6th, 1928, Bellevue Hospital. No family at the bedside, no last rites, just a nurse scribbling the time on a chart and muttering a quiet prayer. But that's not when he died. Arnold Rothstein, the real one, died the moment he realized they stopped fearing his name. That was the real shot, the fatal blow, the one no doctor could stitch. In his final moments, the very last breath, he thought not of power, not of revenge, not even of legacy. He thought of a chessboard, simple, wood grain, the pieces lined up neatly, no violence, no shouting, just strategy, discipline. He had always been the kind of man who played 5 moves ahead, but that night, someone had moved a piece he didn't see coming. Checkmate, and he accepted it, like a man, like a king who'd ruled long enough to know every throne comes with a knife beneath it. No tears, no final curse, just breath out